Emerson Duo, I asked to do a presentation on Liberia. Liberia is important, very critically important, not only because it's only now recovering from the trauma of the Civil War. And the trauma of that Civil War needs to be explained. African Americans were taken and sent back to Liberia. One would have thought that having been slaves themselves, they would know how to treat their fellow Africans better. That did not happen. And again, this brings Nkrumah to mind again. And many people don't know. There's a lot of discussion about affirmative action, whether it should continue or should not continue. Or that we've had affirmative action for so long, it's time for us to move on. Let's just scrap the whole thing. Long before the United States saw the wisdom of establishing a program for people who were historically discriminated against in education, Nkrumah saw it. And that is the difference between Ghana and its neighbors. Ivory Coast has also just gone through a civil war. Since 1963, Togo, our next door neighbor, has also been going through the same kinds of struggles. The struggle between those parts of the African continent that were the first to be in contact with the West, the southern parts, at least in West Africa, and the northern parts. In Ghana, it was colonial policy not to allow people from the northern parts of the country to go to school. Why? The same reasons that Africans were brought here in the first place. We need cheap labor. If they went to school, they have funny ideas about getting big government jobs. So the whole of northern Ghana, more than half the size of the country, until Nkrumah came to power, there was one secondary school. One. If you were bright in grade school and you had to go to high school, there's only one school you could go to, Tamale Secondary. He changed that. As leader of government business, and in the early days as prime minister, there was this spree of building schools which only recalls what happened in the United States, all those land grant schools that came into being during Reconstruction. So the secondary schools got built all over the place. So, and not only the secondary schools were built, there was a special scholarship program for those parts of the country that it was colonial policy not to be educated. Surprise, surprise, in the United States, as in Ghana, the Southern Ghanaians are arguing, we've been independent for 50 years, no need for Northern scholarships anymore. How you're going to correct the mistakes of the colonial past that lasted nearly 100 years with only 50 years of independence, I don't know. Similarly, how you're going to end the historical discrimination in education for African Americans by scrapping affirmative action. I'm not saying that affirmative action is perfect. There are certain things that have to be done about it. And then finally, there is that portion of Africana studies in which we are still very weak, psychology. If the West held any promise to us, if the Enlightenment, the revolution in thinking in the 18th century that led to the environment, to the Enlightenment, which argued that rationality is the way to go, at least now we know, through the work of psychologists, that that part of the brain that we use in rational thinking actually is very little. There's so many things that go on in our minds that we are not even aware are going on. And all those need to be explained through the application of the science of psychology. So I want us to start the session by watching a short video, The Psychological Residuals of Slavery. 2 semesters ago, I showed that video in class at the wrong time. And it took us back 3 weeks. Because basically the video says that you cannot understand the African American experience without an understanding of the psychological impact and traumas of slavery. And all my students said, slavery ended long ago, what's it got to do with me? So I want us to watch it, maybe have a little discussion about it, and we have our psychology specialist has just arrived, George, would make his presentation on studies in African American psychology. I've also asked Crystal Means from the art faculty to explain to us how they did this posters. These posters you see around here were all made by students on campus, because when we were going to have this conference last year, I said, okay, this is a Hail Mary pass, go to the art faculty and see if they could do anything. And they say, yeah, Bill Hupschmidt is your man, he teaches digital art. And his first response to me was that pictures, I said, well, there are copyright on some of these things, I have to teach the students to respect copyright. And I said, okay, this is probably a 35-year-old German immigrant following the rules. And when I went to meet Bill Hupschmidt, he knew so much about Nkrumah already. Bill Hupschmidt is in his late 50s. And he said he came to know so much about Nkrumah because in college his roommate was Ghanaian. So let's begin showing the psychological residuals of slavery. I'd like Emerson to make his presentation because it relates directly to what you just seen. Because until 1980, when there was that violent coup, and the president of Liberia and the ministers were lined up on the beach and shot, those formerly enslaved Africans in America who were taken to Liberia and formed a government did to the natives who were already there exactly what was done to them. That is the enigma. Because one would have thought that you went through a terrible experience, would have learned from that terrible experience, and wouldn't treat people the way you were treated, but human beings are not like that. The Ghanaian writer Kwame Abo, I don't know if this is true, but he has written it, that the rebels, the mutineers on the Amistad, who were defended by John Adams, their leader, Sangbe Pierre. When he returned to Africa, what did he do? He caught people and sold into slavery. Understand?